Can you see that there's a thing in you that craves unhappiness? Let's not give it a name. Let's not call it anything. Just see it. Notice it. Notice that there's a thing. And if there was any response, any triggering, any defensiveness, that's it. There it is. It's just created unhappiness in this moment. Unhappiness being uncomfortable emotion of some kind, unpleasant emotion, negative emotion, however you want to call it, it doesn't matter. See that there's a thing in you that has an identity built around unhappiness. It sustains itself, it builds itself up by the telling of the unhappy story, by the calling of itself wounded or lonely or outcast or diminished, demeaned, attacked, transgressed against. Any of these things. It craves the unhappiness. It feeds on it. It makes itself bigger by the perpetuation of unpleasance, by the sowing of discontent. And so it sows it. It tells the unhappy story. It makes the judgments. It says, look at that person. It says, look at me. Sad, lonely, afraid, small. Look at me. Why am I not better? Why am I not this? Why are they this? It creates those thoughts and the resulting emotions, which are the body's natural response to those thoughts, that are unpleasant, that are painful. And then in your natural response to this of, I don't want to feel that way because it doesn't feel good, you actually feed it. You feed it by believing you are it. You feed it by believing that emotional sensation, which is an illusion that it has created through the telling of a made-up story, is real. And it feels real. It's very convincing. Of course it is. You wouldn't believe it otherwise. It does a really good job of masquerading as you, of convincing you to believe it, to accept that it's you, to accept that this is your unhappiness, that this is your story, your tale of woe, that this is your wound, your victimization. Because that's how it continues to exist. That's how it continues to grow. So just notice it. It feeds on the resistance. It feeds on struggle. It creates drama because by your lapse of consciousness and believing in this shadow it has cast as real, because it feels so very palpable, so tangible, it gets bigger. It is able to sustain itself this way. See that there is something in you that craves unhappiness. And so it tells the unhappy stories. It generates these thoughts. And so the emotions that result from them, that are then experienced and perhaps called wrong or bad or scary or something you want to get away from. But there is only more suffering generated. See that there's this thing in you which craves suffering. Acknowledge it. Acknowledge that it exists. See that it is there. And then see that you are tired of suffering. You are not that which craves suffering. It is this thing in you And it might tell you things like suffering is noble or worthwhile. It will tell you the pain is worthwhile. Suffering is not noble. It's just suffering. And it's not worthwhile. The only thing suffering can create is more suffering. It just begets itself. There is no end of suffering found in more suffering. You don't find it there. There is no healing found in the digging into wound. There is no victory found in the digging into victimization. It's a bottomless pit. There is no end of suffering by suffering. The way out is seeing there is this thing. There is this thing in me that craves suffering, that loves it, that feeds on it, thrives on it, and it alone is responsible for my continued experience of suffering. And I no longer desire that. Therefore, I no longer feed this thing. It tells the unhappy story. It creates that triggering sensation of discomfort within me, and I see it. And simply see it. I simply see that it is there. There it is. There is the thing in me that craves suffering. And I am choosing no more suffering, because I am choosing peace. I am choosing joy. I am choosing no more pain for myself, because that is what I desire and what I deserve. And all it takes is to no longer feed this thing. So let me witness it instead. Let me see when this thing arises. Let me notice the sensation of discomfort and recognize, there it is. There it is. I feel the discomfort. Perhaps I even caught the thought beforehand. Perhaps I didn't. Perhaps I just feel this sensation of emotion which I would call unpleasant. And now I see the thing which craves suffering in me is there, is active, is awake. But I choose no more suffering. And so I choose simply to see it, not to follow it, not to believe its story, its tale of woe. To allow that it exists. Certainly it exists. It is now. I am seeing it. It is what is. It is a part of present experience, and I witness and allow it. But I see it as the thing in me. It is not me. In my unconscious identification with this thing, which it wants because it creates identity from pain, it maintains its self through pain. And I see now I have been feeding it by my mistaken identification with it, my thinking it is myself when it is not myself. It is the thing in me that has built a sense of self from pain. And if I desire no more pain, and I do, then I no longer believe this thing. I no longer follow it. I no longer feed it. I am no longer invested in it. I simply see it. I bring the light of my awareness to it. And in the light of awareness, illusion cannot sustain. It is exactly the same as seeing a thing in your room at night which you think is a person or a monster. And as you are there cowering, looking at it, trying to make out the features, trying to identify it one way or another, all the while bundled up in your suffering and your resistance. But when you make the decision to just stand up and turn on the lights, you see it is a piece of furniture. It's a coat rack. It's a mop with a jacket thrown on top. By the light, all the illusion is revealed. And once it's revealed, once you see it, the sensation that that illusion had created within you dissipates. Because now you know. You know the truth. You know there is no threat. You know there is nothing to fear. You know this is not you and not your suffering. You know there is no suffering. All of it is an illusion. And so you choose to see no more suffering. You choose to believe no more suffering. You choose no more suffering. And you keep choosing and keep choosing. And by your continuous realization and bringing the light of awareness to this thing in you that craves unhappiness, you no longer allow unhappiness to sustain in your internal environment. And you don't do it by resistance. You do it by awareness. Just bringing your awareness to the existence of this thing. That's it. And this is the way to end all suffering. It is a practice, and it takes repetition. But it is the only practice. It is the only thing you ever need to do. So if you want to stop suffering, stop suffering. That is the key, the one and only way. See that there is this thing in you which craves it, and choose to stop. You have that power. So make the choice today. Cease all suffering.